trouble with Scotland is that it's full of Scots. Perhaps the time has come to reinstitute an old custom. Grant them prima nocte. First night, when any common girl inhabiting their lands is married, our nobles shall have sexual rights to her on the night of her wedding. If we can't get them out, we'll breed them out. That should fetch just the kind of lords we want to Scotland. Taxes or no taxes, eh?
A most excellent idea, sire.
Is it?
I come to claim the right of prima nocta. As lord of these lands, I will bless this marriage by taking the bride into my bed on the first night of her union.
Oh, by God, you will not!
It is my noble right.
Thank you for tuning in once again. This is Eos Prime Noctis Part 2. Thank you, Green Chi Network and YouTube watchers for tuning back in to this complex topic on the Eos Prime Noctis. And as I was saying in the last episode, we were talking about the church and its role in the Eos Prime Noctis as it was part of Charlemagne's campaign to subjugate the Saxons. And one of the things that people have got to understand is because, as you remember in the last episode, some of the prelates, just like their aristocratic counterparts, became owners of vast tracts of land in the German territories, namely the Saxon territories. They became members of this clique of nobles who had rights to to exercise, I should say, the Eos Prime Noctis as well. Do not be fooled. The prelates of the church in medieval times very often took the same rights that their noble counterparts did. And as the medieval times would go on, you would see monasteries have serfs, and as I just said, bishops and prelates have serfs, and therefore the Eos Prime Noctis could technically be exercised, because at that particular time, at least before the Crusades would get underway, and indeed into the Renaissance, you would have this situation come up where, the local bishop or the local prelate, whatever it was, could be the father of some of his serfs' children. And I would be remiss not to mention how sexual exploitation could also go in a more deviant direction, and you would have the practicing of homosexuality and the forcing of males who happen to be serfs to perform sex acts, both in terms of the ecclesials as well as the regular nobility themselves. But for the most part, the Eos Prime Noctis certainly as Charlemagne established it, was aimed at the female. Now, as the Eos Prime Noctis went westward in terms of France, where it would become known as the Joute du Seigneur, you would have the situation where many of the nobles would accept a tribute by their serfs in exchange for not taking conjugal rights on the bridal night of their spouse or intended. And that was seen as being a way of offsetting the more violent proportions of the Eos Prime Noctis. But when the Normans took over, sailed across the English Channel, and took over what was then Britannia or England, the Eos Prime Noctis was again employed, and under the rubrics was of conquest, because the Normans, as they were taking over England, and people remember the Battle of Hastings, 1066, and Edward the Confessor, but nevertheless, when the Norman invasion was being implemented after the initial conquest, and the more cruder measures of the Eos Prime Noctis was used in terms of trying to not so much subjugate the people of England and Scotland, but particularly England, to Christianity, but to the subjugation of the English crown that the Normans established there and took over from the antecedent kings. What you would have is a situation where the Eos Prime Noctis was used as a way for all English people to have carte blanche rights over anybody who was not English. And those barons would have the right, just as in Charlemagne's time, to go into the peasant or the serf's hut and take the wife or the intended bride and father and sire children who would then be subject to the English crown. And those of you who have seen the movie Braveheart will know that that was the impetus when King Edward I, in terms of the film, reinstituted the Eos Prime Noctis as a way of getting back his hegemony over Scotland. The rebellion led by, I was going to say, the rebellion that was led by, or the leader of the rebellion, I should say, but I'm going to say it like this, the rebellion that was led by William Wallace was ignited because of the reinstituting of the Eos Prime Noctis. And let me just say as an aside, the actor who played King Edward I in that movie should have gotten the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor, because he really brought to life and was able to make tangible the mentality that the medieval mind had back then to rape, pillage, and kill. That scene alone where they were on the battlefield and he ordered his own archers to kill both the Scots and his own conscriptions. And, you know, one of the Englishmen came to Edward I, the actor who was playing Edward I, and said, "But our men are still in the field." And he turned to them and said, "Yeah, but the enemy is too. Attack!" And so they commenced to firing their own arrows on their own men, but that kind of brutality was second nature to the feudal lords and kings. And you see, in case you were wondering about the role of Christianity in all of this, well, you must understand that Christianity was not necessarily a pacifying or non-violent religion. And the very ideas of the modern perception of what Latin supremacy under the guise and guidance of the Roman Catholic understanding was not there to just be meek and mild and practice the tenets of Sermon on the Mount. You must understand that Jesus of Nazareth was not nonviolent. And one can read the New Testament and come upon, outside of the whole Sermon on the Mount, and even in Sermon on the Mount, as he gets to, especially in Mark's Gospel and in Matthew's, as he gets into what happens when people do not follow the dictates of the Lord, when he said, you know, they will be thrown into the hellfire or the fires of Gehenna. You see, that's not being nonviolent. And in the theology and the doctrine that was taught then, it was better that you would bring in the heathen by hook or by crook than to damn, in essence, the heathen to hell and the hellfires. And so the more humane thing to do, at least in the medieval mind, was to take the wife of the conquered peoples, sire, child, and make sure that they stayed within the evangelization and doctrines and dictates of the faith. You see, this is why the church is having, particularly the church apologists, are having such a difficult time getting the prelates, to say nothing of the priests, but the prelates into line, because a lot of the privileges and exemptions from law, you see, because Pope Leo III gave to Charlemagne the rights to do as he willed in Saxony, but more importantly, and this is to Charlemagne's chagrin, you know, the churchmen could claim ecclesiastical privilege. In other words, you can't try a prelate or a priest in the secular courts or jurisdiction. You have to try them in the ecclesial courts. And so a lot of prelates got away with not only murder, but sexual exploitation through that very rubric of law giving and law's parameter. The legal structure and framework allowed them to claim immunity from any kind of secular justice or jurisprudence or whatever you want to call it. But anyway, the eos prime noctis is by far one of the most notorious features of medievalism. But in the grand scheme of Latin supremacy, it would have its reiterations in the later aspects of colonialism in the New World. And I will take that back up in another episode. Thank you again for tuning in to this second part of the eos prime noctis. To my audience in the Green Chi Network, thank you again. Please subscribe to my channel. I gotta build up the channel. Malveaux Talks. And again, this is a service just like PBS's or public television. And please be generous. Hopefully there is a Charon underneath all of this where you can see my PayPal information. Thank you once again for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video.
Archers, won't we hit our own troops?
Yes. But we'll hit theirs as well. We have reserves. Attack!
Archers!
Archers!